Welcome, everybody. It's Friday once again. That means it's time for MSP Confidential. In fact, I'll be truthful, it's only Tuesday at the moment. We're pre recording this very special episode with Mr. Shawn Walsh of Encore Strategic. It is kind of a Thanksgiving theme this week. And what a better theme than to have the pumpkin plan as one of the discussion topics, given that pumpkin is kind of out, pumpkin spice lattes and pumpkins and everything to do with Thanksgiving. Welcome, Shawn, to the live stream. How have you been, man?
I've been fantastic. Thank you for asking, and thank you for having me on.
It's a real pleasure. It's too bad we couldn't also get Dave today. I hope everything's cool with him. And but awesome to have you here for a chat. Man, I've got so many questions. I last saw you in London for the Halo PSA Orbit 24 event. And unfortunately, they put both you and Dave at the same time on the schedule, so I couldn't see both of you present. So I had to pick one. I picked you at the moment, and you were so insightful and so extensive in some of your advice and in the stuff that you were talking about. And I figure it's some of the talk track is maybe finding its way out of the pumpkin plan and some of the stuff that you guys did to create this narrative. And so maybe I thought I'd start there. What was a lot of people are familiar with the pumpkin plan already. In fact, it's been kind of this cryptic thing that people tell, oh, you got to go read the pumpkin plan to MSPs that are just starting. And now you guys licensed the content from Mike Michalowicz and you wrote an MSP version of this. And so what was the trigger to get you thinking about doing a whole book launch?
Yeah, great question. So, a couple of years ago, I was doing one of the keynotes as part of the ASCII conference series around the country. And before that, I had been a big fan of Mike's books, and I used the original pumpkin plan in my own company as well as Profit First. When I sold my MSP and I started doing consulting, I went looking for material that I could use with my clients so that we weren't reinventing the wheel. And there is a pumpkin plan certified coach program that Michalowicz has with a business partner. So I joined that, but I had never really met Mike in person, but I was in the program and that. And I get to the first ASCII event, and I realized that Mike is the main keynote, and they have put me on right before him. And I thought, oh. And then I get up on stage and I'm about to give my first presentation, and here comes Mike in the door, and he sits down right in front of me. And I'm like, oh my God, he's going to sit here and watch me. No pressure. So after that, I tracked him down, and we joked about it, and I introduced myself. And, over the series of doing this together for 10 shows, we got to know each other pretty good, and I've gotten to be good friends with him. And what I hadn't realized at the time is that Mike started in the IT industry, and his company that he sold originally to his partner, um, eventually went on to become an MSP because he sold it before an MSP was a thing. And then it turned out we found out that Dave was good friends with his business partner and didn't realize that it had been the business partner. So we had all these connections that came together. Now, Mike had allowed people to write what they call derivative books of Profit First. And there were several very successful versions of Profit First that were written for specific industries. But nobody had ever written one for the Pumpkin Plan. And after that series of shows, Mike approached Dave and I, and he said, "Hey, I really like it if you guys could write the first derivative of the Pumpkin Plan and do it for managed service providers, since that's the space that I came out of. That's what you guys know." So we negotiated with him, and we had a licensing fee, but we got to work with his team, and it was a great learning experience. And the book that you have there, our book, The Pumpkin Plan for the Managed Service Provider, is it's about 15% of of content that we took from the original Pumpkin Plan. So you've got the framework, but what we did was we really put stories around it about the MSPs that we've worked with and our own experience running our own MSPs and the challenges that we faced and that we overcame.
Context. Yeah, so important.
Yeah, because I tell people all the time, Dave and I are up there talking, not because we're the smartest guys in the room, but because we've made every possible mistake in business that you could between the two of us, and yet we still managed to survive, and get out fairly unscathed. So I thought we really had a responsibility to share that message with the community and show people what we've learned, so that hopefully somebody avoids some pain points that we had to struggle through. And that's kind of really the goal of the book.
You know, I just had this realization that I think all the folks like yourself, even I've spent a lot of time in front of MSPs talking about the mistakes that I made during my time, is perhaps not to help them prevent making the errors, but to let them know they'll be okay on the other side of making the same mistakes.
Yeah,
And
either way, either way it helps, you know. But yeah, that's very true. Sometimes we have to learn it the hard way. But if you know that you can make mistakes and still go through and come out on the other side okay, then that's useful as well.
yeah. So obviously, there's a lot of conceptual stuff in the book, both the pumpkin plan as well as your version. Top clients is one of those things, it kind of really encourages thinking about who are your best clients and focusing a lot of your work on the clients that are actually, following a bit of the advice and doing those things. And I don't want to ask you so much about the methodology around finding a top client, because I think those are fairly easy concepts to understand. But I did want to ask you, since you had your own business, the process or nuance of coming to terms with the relationship that you have to let go of in the case of a client that you need, that is not one of your top clients, but that you perhaps feel this loyalty towards, and it's not reciprocated most of the time, which is, I think, the sad part. But it's a bit of that hero complex that exists in our space a little bit. Can you speak to that a touch?
Oh, absolutely. Matter of fact, I remember the first time that I ran into that, and it was actually them letting me go. And it was a law firm, and that lawyer was probably the very first client I ever had. And then one day he called up and said, "You know what? I'm going to somebody else." And I was like, "Why?" And what it came down to, he didn't, we were, this was when we were transitioning to the MSP model. And he didn't particularly care for the model and the pricing of that. And I was kind of devastated because I thought this was, somebody who kind of came up. And, my wife, who worked in the business, looked at me. She said, "We've grown tremendously since you took him on as a client. He hasn't. We've outgrown him. It's not a bad thing." And you know what? The person he's going to is a small shop like you used to be, and they're going to take good care of him. And you need to accept the fact that it's just, there are people who we're going to outgrow along the way, and you have to get used to changing.
Hmm.
And and that's and that's a big part of it. It's really understanding that, whether it's your team or your clients, those who got you here may not get you there, because things change when you grow, and processes change, and the needs of the company change, and the needs of your clients change. And you have to be willing to adapt to that. If you're not going to adapt, one of the posters I keep in our office is a picture of an old blockbuster building in the middle of a desert with tumbleweeds going by. And if you're not willing to adapt in any business, that's what you're going to be, the next blockbuster.
A
You
stark
know,
reminder indeed.
you
Well,
got
I
to
think
adapt.
it's even more pragmatic than you make it sound, because I think it's been proven out over the years that we've been around things like Paul Dippel's OML framework and things like that. And I do have this conversation from the time to time, and most MSPs would agree, and I'd love your take on this. It's not ideal when the maturity level of the client and the MSP are too far apart. And I think part of the evolution is obviously that we kind of are evolving in this maturity together. And when you get too far apart from your client in either direction, I think you obviously grow apart from the relationship as well. You just realize they can no longer serve me, or I can no longer serve them. And that sort of is the realization, sometimes too late in the stage of the relationship in most cases. But your thoughts on just
Absolutely.
operational maturity matching, supposedly.
Yes. There's some wiggle room on either side of that, but when that gap starts getting too far apart, one of you is going to have a problem with it. And eventually it's going to go badly if you're not honest and upfront about it. So you need to be assessing that. And I'll take it a step further. Not only do you need to make sure that you're maintaining parity with the operational maturity of your clients, but the other thing that I think people greatly underestimate is the necessity for clients to be in alignment with your core values as much as your staff need to be in alignment with your core values. Maybe not core value for core value, word for word, but if you're taking on clients that ask you to violate core values or that just run their business in a way that goes against your core values, they are not going to be a good client for you, no matter how much they're willing to pay you, or no matter what their maturity level. We find core value misalignment of core values is a bigger problem with bad relationships with clients than anything else.
Yeah, yeah, truly. And this is, I think core values are interesting because I think for a lot of MSPs, especially starting small, you have these maybe inherent sense of what your values are, what you stand for. But for the most part, these things are not articulated until it feels like a larger organization can support the communication of it internally. And I always think back to, I remember when we started doing CSAT reports or just asking customers to survey the experience through some of their tickets when I was a two-person shop. And one of the customers I remember called out, it feels kind of silly that I know you're reading the CSAT report about the service that you yourself just delivered to me. Like, what's the point of these? I'm just going to tell you if I wasn't happy with whatever you're doing. And it just made me remember just how there's a bit of like this maybe organizational size that makes it feel okay to do certain processes or certain things at a certain level. And core values a little bit feels like that. Like, if you have one other person in your business, it's you and one other person, sitting around talking about core values might feel silly because you kind of expect those to just be understood to some extent. But have you seen sort of MSPs struggle with the idea of core values based on the size that they're currently at?
I see what I see is a struggle in that number one, they don't articulate the core values.
Mm.
And number two, there's a lot of what Patrick Lencioni refers to as permission to play values, honesty, integrity.
Yeah,
Your core
baselines.
values, right? Your core values should really be the things that make you different. Why is the experience with your MSP going to be different than the one down the street? That's what your core values should articulate. We all need to be honest. We all need to have integrity, and um, to some degree, there's a problem that if people say it, they don't feel they have to do it. Lencioni in one of his speeches says that, as an example, one of Enron's core values was integrity. So, um, so you really need to think about it from what makes the experience different. And the way when I work with MSPs to articulate their core values, if they're not sure, we get the team together, and one of the questions I ask them is, tell me some of the stories that you tell every new employee that comes in here about the time you saved the day with the
Mm.
customer, or about the customer that really drove you crazy, or about how you guys really went to the wall to solve this problem. You're going to find that your core values, every company has an oral history that gets told around the water cooler and the coffee pot, and you'll find the core values in those stories. And I even challenge a company if they have core values, if when I ask them, if they say, oh, yeah, we have well-defined core values, I'll say, great, give them to me. And if they can read them to me off the top of their head, which usually they can't, I'll ask them, great, tell me a story about a time when somebody challenged you on that core value and how you dealt with it. And if they can't tell me a story, I'll counter that I don't believe it's a core value if you can't tell me a good
Mm.
story.
So good.
Uh,
Many years ago when I was in BNI, one of the folks that was a member, Allison Brand, brand strategist, graphic designer, really sort of went through that exercise. And I remember at the time, actually, I did a session with her. And one of the things she said really stuck with me throughout the years. And this is like early 2000s around there. But you said core values are not designed or installed; they are discovered. And I thought that was so like thoughtful for the time, because like it's so true. Like you are the behaviors that you allow, right? In many other ways, it's kind of the
Right.
other thing you hear a lot of. And so I love that idea of like gathering around the water cooler and listening for what the current core values are. And if there's something that's not sounding right, then obviously you got to fix that at a cultural level. And then the core values kind of follow after that. Really love that.
And to that point, sometimes we find that they have core values and they're not necessarily positive. So, and that becomes a whole different problem to solve. But
Yeah.
but it can go both ways with that.
I love that also, that the connection to the behaviors that you allow with your clients can become your own values within the organization. Not even just the behaviors you permit internally, but the way you let clients treat you, the way that you let clients drive certain types of relationships. Back in the early 2000s, maybe there was a little bit more wiggle room around licensing, for example. Let's just call it that. And so, like, you're kind of either on one side of that fence or the other. And if you let clients kind of drive the behavior, then that becomes your core value. That becomes your culture internally too. And it's really tough to back out of that once you sort of start to grow in size.
Absolutely, absolutely. That is something that we've seen time and time again. So, you have to really vigorously defend your core values, and you have to be diligent about enforcing them. Because the minute you allow something to slide with your team that goes against the core value, you've just invalidated all of them, because when the team sees you allow one team member to act against a core value, and you tolerate it, you are now a hypocrite and a liar.
Wow.
And why should I follow any of the other core values? Because you just proved to me that that's not really a core value, because you're allowing it to happen. John Spence, great guy to follow on LinkedIn. He's written some amazing books. One of my favorite is Awesomely Simple, and and I met him when he did a keynote for us, and he told me a story about when he was doing a keynote for a large company, and when he walked in the door of the company, there was a bronze plaque, and it had the core values of the company, and one of the values was that we treat each other with respect. We treat our team members with respect, and John talked about core values during the talk, and afterwards the CEO came up to him and said, "Oh, that was a great talk, and I really liked what you have with core values. I have a question for you, because we have a problem." He said, we our top salesperson, he crushes the numbers, he does a great job with the clients, but he treats our team like garbage, and he's really a horrible person to other team members. What do I do about that? And John said, "Well, you have to fire him." And the guy's, "What do you mean? He's our number one salesperson." He said, "All right, you got two choices. You can fire him, or you need to go to the maintenance room, find a hammer and chisel that core value off that bronze plaque in your lobby, because otherwise you're just a liar and a hypocrite." And that hit
It hit
home with
home.
me.
Yeah.
And that's when I really started to look at the importance of core values. And we really see a big difference between companies that understand their core values, train their team members on it. You hire, evaluate, and fire team members by adherence to core values. There's a big difference in those companies, and how well they do in the long term.
Yeah.
There's way more, too many people think that core values is just marketing fluff. And if you do, then you really need to re-examine how you're doing your core values.
I remember also hearing Simon Sinek talk about the importance of making core values something that is a verb, an active action, not sort of the inert noun type of word or subject, because it doesn't incite action the same way when it's not a verb. And I thought that was always so insightful. I remember going through the whole process of redesigning how we articulated our core values at my own MSP, and they all became verbs. And I think it made it so much easier to talk about them in terms of that, echo chamber, or not echo chamber, but the tribal knowledge, the water cooler talk, the coffee pot talk, because it's so much easier to relate them to a story when they're an action or a verb. And I always thought that really stuck with me right from back from that day. And any company I've been at where you see core values that are just these words, sitting inertly on the wall. I always, if there's ever a brand exercise to revisit these things, I always encourage, can we make these verbs like something that is action driven? And people always tend to react quite positively to that.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, you have to constantly be reinforcing it with your team. One of the clients that I work with, this company does such a great job of living their core values. And every time they have a staff meeting, an all hands staff meeting, they're a rapidly growing company, so there's always new people there. And the owner, whenever he does this talk to everybody, he reminds them of the core values, and he tells the new people, he tells them, you will never get in trouble here for making a mistake. He said, this is IT. If you're not making mistakes, you're not trying. He said, we want you to be pushing the boundaries. He said, there's only one litmus test. When you make a decision, it needs to be in line. You need to ask yourself, does this align with our core values? If it does and you're wrong, that's okay. Now what we're going to learn from it and we're going to move on. He said, but if you make that decision and it goes against our core values, now we're going to have a problem. And he said, for that matter, even if it turns out you're right and it goes against the core values, we're still going to have a problem. So he constantly reinforces with the team. You can make decisions. You don't need to ask permission, but it's got to align with the core values. And like I said, this company outperforms 90% of the MSPs out there, and it shows you the value of the core values and what it does for their team.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think bad culture, it can be cancerous. It can be like a weed, and I think the topic or the concept of weeds in the pumpkin plant is also interesting. And I wanted to ask you, I think there are maybe not necessarily bad things, but maybe counterproductive things that we often get used to doing a certain way, and then when we realize we should improve or iterate or replace certain behaviors, again, not necessarily bad, just simply potentially counterproductive, to try and achieve the next level of efficiency, maturity, growth, profitability, you name it. I was curious to ask you, what are some of the most common weeds that you see sort of dragging people down a little bit? And of course, you guys have your peer group that you work with. So you're working closely with MSPs and really in the details of how they operate and where they're getting stuck on some of these things. So I'm curious to ask you what some of those regularly seen weeds are.
Sure. So right out of the gate, what you just kind of alluded to with the team is tolerating bad employees. I mean, and the smaller the organization, the more that one bad hire, the more damage it can do. And there is no skill set
Mhm.
that is worth keeping around toxic personalities. And I see this over and over again. I can't fire that person. They're the only person who knows XYZ firewall. What are we going to do? And every time they finally fire that person, it's amazing how quickly the other team members step up to fill the void. And the most common response is, what took you so long? Don't let that poison spread. Your company will never grow if your team has a cancer in it, but yet we all do because we're so afraid of hiring for skill set. Okay, you need to stop hiring for skill set. You need to start hiring for culture fit and core value fit. In our recruiting division that Dave runs, that we've now spun off into People Sharp as a separate company. Dave says that we hire people who we find candidates who are hungry, humble, and smart. Because when you're hungry, humble, and smart, we can teach you to do anything. And
Mhm.
then you fit that into EOS. Do they get it? Do they want it? Do they have the capacity to do it? And if you combine those two things, you're going to be on fire because you're hiring people who want to learn, who want to grow, who want to be part of something, not just somebody who says, I have a skill set. Inherently, MSPs that hire for skill set pay I think the number we had data on this. Off the top of my head, I want to say they're paying 20 to 30% more in salaries because you pay a premium for a skill set, and you're much more likely to get somebody who's not a good culture fit and is going to cause nothing but friction in the organization. So, not tolerating the bad apples and making sure that you're hiring with the right focus. And skill set is not the focus that you should be having. Those are big areas. Okay, now we go to the client side, the other weeds. Tolerating C-list clients. We look at our A-list clients and we go, okay, they're good. We got a great relationship. And then you got this whiny client over in the corner, and we run around trying to make them happy instead of just getting rid of them. And then we spend so much time trying to make them happy, we don't realize that we missed the fact that the A-list client was unhappy and now they've left, and now we lost the A-list client and we're stuck with the whiny client. So in Dave's former MSP, they had a rule, and we were in a peer group meeting one day, and somebody was complaining about a client, and Dave looked at them and said, "We have a rule in our company. Clients get to be cheap or a pain in the ass. They don't get to be both. If they're a cheap pain in the ass, they get fired."
I
And we
love that.
laughed, but that has really become a mantra, because if you think about it, if they're cheap but they pay on time and they're nice and they're easy to work with, then that's fine. And if they're a pain in the butt, but they pay you well and and they treat your team okay and they challenge you, those are ones that can help you grow. But when they're a cheap pain in the ass, then those are the ones who you waste your time on. And to the pumpkin plan concept, you're putting the resources on the pumpkin that will never grow instead of paying attention to that A-list client that can grow with you.
Aside from the
So,
fact that they will drive the team absolutely crazy in most
oh
cases,
yeah.
and that seems to be a pattern that repeats itself over and over and over again, no doubt.
So, so we have an assessment and it's with the free tools that come with the book. But we have a client assessment that we tell people to go through, and we have people list out their clients, and then we determine what is the effective hourly rate of that client. All right. But then we have a series of 5 questions that you answer, and it's, do they pay on time? Cringe factor. When they call in and the caller ID pops up on the phone,
Ooh.
does all your team go, "Oh God, I hope somebody else picks up the phone"? Do they value your advice, and do they treat your team with respect? Things like that. So we have a dollar grade on the profitability, and then we have a letter grade on, do we really like these people, and do we like working with them, and do they align with us? And what it comes down to is a lot of MSPs don't bother to look at the profitability of individual clients. They know their numbers aren't great, but what happens is, I mean, we had one MSP that we were working with not too long ago, and we found that on 25% of their clients, they were losing money and they had no idea.
Wow,
So
that's a lot too.
they could fire 25% of their client base and be more profitable, and do less work and have less headaches. But we went through this exercise. So now, if you've got a client that's got a low dollar value and a bad letter grade, like a D or an F, you just fire them. There's too many things wrong there. It's not a healthy relationship. But then you've got the clients where you've got a low dollar figure, but you've got a really good letter grade. So you like working with them. They're good people. Now you have to go have the hard conversation, and you have to just go to them and say, "Look, we love working with you, but we have to change our rate structure. This isn't working." And people are so afraid to have that conversation. But the reality is, if your client is really in alignment with you, chances are they're a good business person. A good business person understands that other business people have to make a reasonable profit. And if they value your services, they want you around. And like I've told people I was telling a contractor that did some work for me, he was hemming and hawing over the price. And I said, "Stop, I'm not looking for a discount. I want a fair price, and I want to know the work's going to be done. And if you set your price too low, You won't be here when I need you to do the next job, and I want you here to do the next job.
Yeah.
So you go to the clients and you have that hard conversation. And this one MSP, we identified 10 clients that were very, he was losing money on all 10. Two of them, I said, just fire them. The other eight, go talk to. Well, he went and talked to all 10. The two that were the ones he should have fired immediately started blaming him, and it was all his fault, and he wound up firing them during the meeting. The other eight, not one of them said no. More than one of them, he had to triple or quadruple their monthly payment. And their response to him was, we were wondering when you were going to raise your rates.
Yeah. What took you so long?
Exactly? Again, what took you so long? So we as business owners have such a fear of going and increasing rates. And the reality is, if we're doing a good job, we're treating our clients well. If they value what you're doing, they're going to understand. And it's
Yeah.
very rare.
This is a mind-blowing moment when people realize that no reasonable business person wants to get something for nothing. This is it's counter to how we believe that value works in many ways, and so I love that.
Yeah. Well, and you know, the quote that I repeat all the time is I'm a big fan of Michael Porter, who's a Harvard Business School professor. He's written many great works, and one that I recommend that every business owner read is a paper that he did years ago called "What is Strategy?" I ask every new client that we work with to read it. But Porter says you don't have a strategy until you can say no. So
Yeah.
if you're out there saying yes to anything or falling into what we refer to in the book as AFAB, anything for a buck, you don't have a strategy. You're just trading dollars for hours, and you need to fix that.
I think one of the other things he talks about also is that a lot of people confuse strategy with tactical planning. Strategy and planning are not the same thing. And he makes it really easy to figure out which one is which. Strategy is the one that makes you uncomfortable. Planning is just, a matter of fact in many ways. And so that's a good way to recognize if maybe you're confusing the two and not going about strategic discussions the right way. And so I
Yeah.
like that.
A
So
lot of people have that confusion on that. So yeah, that's spot on.
yeah, I am sure there's a number of other quote unquote weeds that are sort of bad behaviors that maybe prevent people from the ability to move forward over the years. But I see also those come up regularly in conversations. So I appreciate your thoughts on those. You kind of mentioned in the process of understanding your letter grades of clients, this kind of goes down the road of client segmentation effectively. And one of the things we were talking about backstage was this idea of standardization and whether that's sort of the root cause of commoditization to some extent. And I think one of the interesting things about segmentation is that what's the point of it if you're not customizing a bit of the work that you do according to the letter grade or the requirements of those clients in those maturity levels, or there's specific requirements. And so I thought maybe we jump into a bit of the topic of standardization, and if you see it kind of play a bit of a negative role in terms of the MSP's ability to go out there and do the right thing for a segmented client base where somebody, perhaps needs a slightly more modular or custom approach to the technology services that they get. What are your thoughts? What have you seen out there?
To scale, you have to have the ability to have documented, repeatable processes, and to sell it, and especially if you build a sales team, you can't be customizing for everybody. So within boundaries, you need to, there's always a certain amount of flexibility you can have, but you got to define who your target market is. And again, that goes to being able to say no to clients who don't fit your target market. But if you want to scale, you're going to have to keep some bumpers on that. You're going to have to keep some boundaries. So there's a certain amount of it that you can do. And that comes into the tools that you're using, the technology. You want clients that take your stack, that or use your tool set. You don't want to be having, a different antivirus for every client because you inherited it. They need to go to your standards. But what you don't have to do is deliver it the same as everybody. you can take a standard tool set that every MSP uses, but you can deliver your services in a way that the client has a different experience. And that's the part that so many MSPs miss about differentiation is they yeah, I've had people in groups tell me, well, we're just the same as every MSP and we're doing the same thing with the same tools and it's impossible to differentiate. And normally when I'm here, I keep a can of liquid death on the table. Yeah, are you familiar with liquid death?
I am, yeah.
So, for those listening, it's a can with water in it. And the company was started in 2018, and they said, we're going to put water in a can. And it's not bubbly water, it's not flavored water, it's plain old water. And it sits on the shelf in Target right next to Dasani that's in a plastic bottle. And the Dasani is 89 cents, and the Liquid Death is $3 a can. And it's water. Okay, what's their differentiation? It's the fact that, well, they will tell you that it's aluminum, it's more recyclable, it's environmentally friendly. We're not putting plastic in the environment. Personally, as a part-time scuba instructor, I am all for anything that puts less plastic in the ocean. That's wonderful. But that's not why they're making money. They're making money because when you stand at the neighborhood barbecue and you're holding a bottle of Dasani, everybody goes, "Oh, you're drinking water? What's wrong? Get a beer." When you hold a can of Liquid Death, what does it look like? It looks like a craft beer can. And people leave you alone and they don't give you a hard time. And I am convinced that that's what's driving their sales. But again, we're talking about water in a can. The
Yeah.
company last February got a valuation $2.4 billion for a 5-year-old company that puts water in a can. If they can differentiate water by putting it in a can, you as an MSP can differentiate. So that's my
Yeah.
argument there. You have something that's way more complex than water in a can. There's plenty of ways for you to deliver a different experience.
Yeah, and I
So
think this differentiation has become such a prescient topic of conversation, mainly because I think for decades we've thought of differentiation as something that comes from our ability to deliver service a certain way, customer service specifically.
yeah,
And the last little while, I see the shift, I see the pivot towards a more customer centric view of whatever that was supposed to mean. Delivering service is maybe the result of a reactive thing that happened with the customer that you're serving them for. And I think that's absolutely a baseline requirement of service delivery that MSPs must get really good at. And I think it informs the basis of many other things that come in the relationship later on. But but the customer centric view, and when we talked about standardization, I wanted to almost clarify that I didn't necessarily mean standardizing the tech stack specifically. If having a standard tech stack was causing problems of commoditization, it's more actually the view that we take with how we engage with clients that is maybe problematic because we leave little room for innovation or questions or understanding that some businesses operate a slightly different way. It's kind of a joke in the MSP world that we say, every MSP is the same, but every MSP is different. You can do the same thing a million different ways. And I think this is also true of the customers that we serve. So it was kind of this interesting idea around the pivot or the shift to a customer success mindset and getting closer to a bit of the customer journey that our own clients are delivering to their end customer base, and finding ways there to unlock technology or innovation through technology or enablement through technology. And when those clients are growing, connecting their department heads together that, hey, they maybe organically grew apart, things like of that nature, and being more client centric, I feel like is an interesting shift I'm seeing a lot in the market today. How about you?
yeah, absolutely. For years, the phrase that I have used with MSPs that we coach is that you need to stop having server room conversations and start having boardroom conversations.
Yes.
You need to be able to explain your services in what matters to the client, not what matters to you. And too long we go in and we talk about speeds and feeds, and the CEO of the company, their eyes glaze over, and they don't understand what you're saying, but they're not going to say anything because they don't want to feel stupid. But you're creating a disconnect, and you're creating a valley. And when you start having boardroom conversations, okay, Miss CEO, tell me about what are your future goals for this company? Do you have any, are you planning on expanding through mergers and acquisitions? Because that would have an effect on your IT. I want to be prepared to serve your goals better. Let's talk about your business plan. And that's eye-opening when the IT guy starts asking those questions, and they're like, "Oh, okay, you get it. This works." But that's the thing, is you need to have the conversation from what's in it for them. They don't care about your tools. They don't care about your technology. They don't care what you do better than the other MSP down the street. They care about how are you going to make their life easier. And when you can have that conversation, that context, you're going to win more business.
So true. We were having the conversation backstage casually that, as it turns out, business hasn't changed in over 1,000 years, and I thought it'd be a good opportunity to bring out the crystal ball, so to speak, and ask you if you think the model or the environment of the MSP is maybe morphing or evolving over the next 5 to 10 years into something that we may not recognize from what we do today. What are your thoughts?
I don't know that it'll be something that we don't recognize, but it will be something different. And I think we are going. I used to joke around with people and say I picked a career where I had to reinvent myself every 3 to 4 years. And the industry's gone through the major shifts where we went from selling hardware and making all this margin on hardware and giving away service, and then we shifted to a service business where we're providing the services of making nothing on the hardware. And then we shifted to the MSP model. And every time we make that shift, there are certain people who adapt and evolve and make the turn, and there's other people who go right off the cliff and never to be heard from again. And I
Yeah.
think we're coming up on one of those curves, and it'll be interesting to see who makes it and who doesn't. But I think there's going to be a big shift in how we look at security and how we look at solutions and offshoring and the whole combination of what we do. I have a theory that the term MSSP is going to be a transitionary term. I don't believe it'll stick around, because if you're not selling security as an MSP, I don't think you'll be here in 5 years.
Hmm.
So that's not good. There's not going to be MSSPs and MSPs. I think that's my prediction. Down the road, everybody's going to have to be security focused, um, and you're going to have that mindset built into your how you do business to survive in this industry going forward.
Yeah. So let's maybe shift a bit of the conversation over to the peer group stuff. This is such a fascinating thing about our industry overall, I find, because you find very few industries like the MSP one where every MSP or customer of a MSP vendor, to put it from that perspective, talks to each other to some extent, or how much it's driven by sort of that peer accountability and how critical that is to raising the bar and the tide for all the boats. And so, curious to ask you, first of all, what got you down the realization that you can enable a group of other MSPs to sort of get better? Because I think this is a unique character trait, perhaps, that people don't know that they have until certain things happen in their life.
Yeah. So early on, I got introduced to peer groups in my professional career, and really what happened was, um, I had come out of the government sector. I hadn't been in the private sector. I mean, we were making money. I didn't know, but I had no idea how to measure it, how to compare. Am I doing it right compared to other people? And I started out with a peer group that was not an MSP focused peer group. It was an organization still around called TAB, the Alternative Board. And I got put into a room with a bunch of other local business owners, non-competing companies. And all of a sudden, the concept of sharing data, sharing best practices, how do you deal with this problem, being an advisory board for one another. And I saw that and I thought, wow, this is really valuable. But I was still struggling about my industry, and they didn't know it. And I think that there's people in this industry that have done us a tremendous service. Arlen Sorensen, um, um, uh, Arnie Bellini, but these people that got peer groups going, um, and created this environment of sharing. Because you're right, there's very few people, there's very few industries where you see the level of sharing in
Mm.
it that you do in the MSP industry. So you know the uh, the people who created that mindset, I don't know that they realized how much it was going to take off. But I tell people all the time when they come to us and they say, "Well, I'm thinking about joining a peer group," and I say, "Look, you don't have to join one of our peer groups, but join a peer group." I said, maybe mine isn't the fit for you. I said, there's lots of them out there. Go out, interview people, do some background checking on the people who are running them, and figure out what their philosophies are, and figure out what's the right fit for you. But join a peer group. So, and I tell people it was by far the best investment I ever made in my company. And so, we continued on with that. And after I sold my company, um, I had a teaching background besides my IT background. I've taught college, I've taught high school, and I saw such value in that. I thought, you know what, I can take this out there and I can build on what's out there, and maybe improve it a little bit, and provide that value to others.
I feel like the peer groups tend to self-manage a bit to a certain extent. The facilitators are big part of that, of course, but the MSPs or the members themselves, self-select and self-manage the right members for their group based on where they are in their journey and how they're contributing. And I was curious to ask you, what do you feel are the traits or the characteristics of an MSP that makes them, or an owner or a participant that makes them a strong contributor to a peer group? It might be a bit of an abstract question and maybe multifaceted, but I'm curious what you come across on a regular basis.
Yeah. Number one, somebody who's willing to be brutally honest with themselves and the other people in the room. I mean, there are groups where we've had members that, we know the numbers that they're reporting are probably not accurate. And that when we say, "Hey, how's it going?" that they kind of paint a rosy picture that it may not be truly accurate. And then you got the people who say, "Oh my God, it's a shit show. Here's what's going on. I need help. This is, yeah, these things over here are going good, but here's where I'm struggling, and here's where I need help." And when you can make that admission, and you can openly share that, you're going to get a lot more out of that group. I mean, we're not sitting there for it to be a mutual admiration society and to pat each other on the back. We're there. I tell people my peer group when I was in it helped me up off the floor when I got my butt kicked, and they knocked me down a few pegs when my ego got too big.
That's
And
awesome.
and, and they kept me in balance. And that's what a good peer group does. But for a peer group to work, you have to be sitting in a room of people that you can absolutely be 100% honest with. And, to use the term from my favorite Patrick Lencioni book is, you have to be willing to get naked. So, you've got to be willing to bear it all in that room. And if you're not willing to do that, save your money. Don't join the group, because you're not going to get the value out of it.
I love it. I love it. Well, there's so much to peer groups, and I attend them regularly. From the vendor perspective, But I often attend them simply to have open conversations about issues, challenges, the stuff that, even I experienced and maybe in hindsight was able to fix, or that I saw how other people are fixing. I get to at least tell the story of some of the things I'm seeing and experiencing out there in the wild. And it's always fascinating. There's always room for that conversation to drive just a productive discussion around the issue, the nuances of solving that issue. And in any given group, you might find that 15 of the members are doing things 15 different ways. And I find that so fascinating to sort of engage in this interesting conversation or discussion about. So I value very much being around peer groups. I find it's sort of the most excited that I get when I'm having conversations, because people are so in that mode of being go-givers too, like of helping. And I'm sure, having been around Arlen and HTG from the early days, that you've come across Bob Berg and some of the concepts around being a go-giver, haven't you not?
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. Matter of fact, it's funny when I had my MSP, every new employee got two books. They got the book The Go Giver, and they got a copy of Getting Naked by Patrick Lencioni, and that was the required reading for all new hires. So yeah, absolutely. I am a firm believer in that concept, of the fact that our first core value as a company is help first, profit later. So. So yes, I greatly take that to heart. But
Yeah, I love that. Help first. And I think this goes a lot to that conversation we were having around the customer centric success, and leading the conversation with clients around help and trust. And it's interesting. I was watching Simon Sinek in an interview with Trevor Noah, the comedian, just last week, and they were getting into this conversation about trust, and I thought this was so relevant to the way that peer groups operated, and that perhaps people don't realize this is what's happening. But Simon Sinek was talking about how trust is built more quickly when you allow people to help you, as opposed to allowing them allowing you to help them. And I thought that was fascinating, because this goes to the concept of getting naked, and allowing people to come in and be in your space, and help, allowing them to help you. And I thought that was such an insightful thing to think about, from the perspective of, like, am I letting people help me when I need it, and that, or blocking it, and ultimately eroding the trust to some extent.
I will tell you that over the years, both as a member of a peer group and as a facilitator of peer groups, some of the most emotionally charged conversations I have seen is when somebody stands in front of the group and does a presentation on their company. I have seen grown adults break down in tears in front of a room of their peers. I have seen peers offer to help one another to extents that you wouldn't expect. I remember one guy broke down in tears, and another member of the group said, "What are you doing Tuesday?" And he's like, "What?" He goes, "I'm flying." Now they were across the country from one another. He goes, "I'm flying to your office. I'm going to be there Tuesday morning, and I'm not leaving till we fix this." And the incredible generosity of the members to each other, but truly, I mean, putting it all out there. I have one member who always jokes about the great butt kicking in Dallas that he had one year. But he was when he got the butt kicking that he talks about, it was a few years back. He was a struggling $1.5 million MSP, and had all kinds of issues. I would say this year he's probably going to hit $8 million, best in class profitability, and has one of the best company cultures and one of the most amazing teams I've ever seen. And whenever he brings it up, I always remind him that, yeah, but that butt kicking is what got you to turn the corner and build this amazing
Yes.
thing that you have now. And he's like, "Yeah, I know." He goes, "I still like giving you a hard time about it." So,
I think that's what's
but
so great, Shawn, about books like The Pumpkin Plan. And it's that, realistically, there are a lot of, quote unquote, larger MSPs that are still pretty, a hot mess. They don't have everything figured out. They're still trying to work through some of the issues and challenges that, a peer half their size or a third their size is encountering as well. And I love the idea of just lingering a little bit longer in the curiosity and figuring out, if something like this might sort of give you that spark or that initiative to go and solve something that you've been ignoring for a long time. Obviously, being in a peer group, people are going to call you out a lot sooner than you're going to realize it on your own. But so I love that aspect of peer groups for the accountability and just sort of being brought into the current state a lot faster than you'd get there on your own. But I highly recommend you folks go out and read The Pumpkin Plan for Managed Service Provider. It's a great read, so digestible, and lots of great little structural nuggets of things that you could be rethinking in your MSP and your operations to improve things for the longer term. It's such foundational stuff. I really love the work on the book. So congrats to you and Dave on a job really well done, and I hope you have a lot of success. I hope it becomes the cult classic of the space. Is everybody has to read The Pumpkin Plan for MSPs before they start their job at the MSP.
I thank you for that, and I'm humbled by that. Dave and I put a lot of hard work into that book, and we really wanted it to be something more than a vanity project. We wanted to make sure it had real meat and provided value. And I do think that, we were very candid about some of the struggles that each of us had. I think we bared it all in there. And, the feedback we've gotten has been great, and I appreciate, you saying it, but, up to the audience to make the decision. But so far, I'm hoping that we've added some value.
Awesome. Well, Shawn, thank you so much for making a little bit of time to come and hang out with me on this live stream, MSP Confidential, the little project that I thought couldn't happen, but we made it work. It's been over a year doing these interesting conversations, and every single time, I'm not even joking, I get so excited by each conversation that it's the little fuel that keeps me going for the next one. So thank you for coming and sharing your knowledge and the things that you think that you're seeing out there. It's such an important part of what we do in this space, is to talk about those stories and let other people learn through our lenses and our eyes. So thank you again. And to everybody that joined for this conversation, this was pre-recorded on Tuesday, November 26th, because we have the Thanksgiving weekend coming up and a lot of people are going to be shut down, but we're going to stream this or you're watching this live on Friday, November 29th. And we hope you enjoyed the conversation. Reach out to Shawn, of course, if you'd like to discuss, a peer group or any of the stuff in the book. Dave is usually also out there in the internets having conversations with folks on LinkedIn. So thank you again, Shawn. And I hope you are well. And thank you for your time and generosity.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us. And we'll see you next time. Ciao.